morning and welcome to the Workforce Observer, the podcast where we go beyond the headlines to uncover the real forces reshaping work, talent, technology, and the business of staffing. Today's guest is Brian Delton, and with more than 20 years at the intersection of technology, talent, and workforce strategy, Brian is a recognized voice in the evolving world of work. As co-founder of Talent Tech Labs, he helps organizations make sense of emerging talent technologies and turn innovation into practical workforce strategy. Welcome, Brian. Very excited to have you here.
Hi, Subhadra. Happy to be here and join you. Hopefully we can have a great conversation. I'm looking forward to it.
We will. I know that you evaluate hundreds of talent acquisition technologies, annually. What separates solutions that sound compelling from those that actually transform hiring outcomes?
Well, that's a great question. Maybe I could just modify a little because I think strong terminology when you say transform hiring outcomes, and maybe if we substitute radically improve, we might have a better shot at an accurate answer. But, it's a great question. And, the differences that we see that really are paramount in having a solution that makes a difference is the solution should actually solve a business problem that can be identified and quantified. It should not be a solution looking for a problem to solve, and all too many end up being that. And so, we're always looking at how novel the solution is to solve an actual problem, and is that problem a pain point that the organization can quantify so that they know what good would look like if they fix it. Demos are always compelling, right? So you've never seen a demo that you don't like, but we find that the winning solutions are ones that actually can fit into the flow of work, whoever that user is, that the solution can fit into the way they work and prove value, and hopefully prove that value early on.
So you're saying really it's not just about the compelling demo at all. I mean, it may look very cool and may do really well, but what's the practical problem that it is solving?
That's exactly right. And if you get into demo space, the demo leader will take you to the points that highlight what that solution does. Then you need to interpret, is that really the problem I'm trying to solve? And so we would prefer to come at it from the perspective of what problem we're trying to solve, and then find the technology that has a chance of solving that.
Living in the Silicon Valley, a phrase that you often hear is, sometimes you solve a problem, but when you're solving the problem, will the dogs eat the dog food?
That is, I guess, a true observation. And if I had to unpack that a little bit, I guess you're getting into adoption. Like, will the solution fit into that organization, the way they work or the way they aspire to work? And what do you need to do to actually set up the organization to be ready for that change? And that certainly is a very critical success factor that we've seen observed over and over again. And it's actually an impediment to innovation breaking through and being more impactful than it presently is.
Right. So I know, you sit between founders and buyers, right? Buyers of services. How has a buyer changed over the last few years?
Well, it's interesting if you kind of look at the arc of it, and we see this when we observe companies' tech stacks, which are the investments they made over the years. And at the beginning, you could see that, clearly the innovation that came to market caught people's fancy, so the sizzle had an impact. And in the early days, you might be able to have a solution that one very informed or motivated stakeholder could actually make a decision saying, I want that, let's implement it, and let's go from there. I think those days are gone. And today what we're seeing is that any solution that's going to be considered needs to do a couple things. First and foremost, CTOs and CFOs are demanding an ROI justification right from the get-go, which means that you need to go back and be able to quantify the problem you're trying to solve and then show how this solution does that cost effectively. Secondly, you need to solve it in the integrated space that the company presently exists. And there's been a pendulum swing of, the big systems don't move fast enough, so we need point solutions, and then we go overboard on point solutions to realize that, wait a minute, there's an awful lot of, back and forth between systems and is the data flowing the way you want it to. And right now the pendulum is back towards people trying to concentrate on what can we do in the core system and then only justify what you need to go outside for and make the case for that. So, the pendulum has gone back to that. And the last point, and I think almost most critically, again, it gets back to adoption. Most people now are realizing that it's not the technology, it's the outcome. And so we are seeing solutions that are necessarily having to solve for the user's experience. Whoever that user might be, whether it's a hiring manager, a candidate, a recruiter, IT service person, whoever is touching the tech, the solution has to solve for their experience and make that seamless and better. Otherwise, all the other, you cited the dog food. People are not going to eat the dog food or drink the champagne if they don't see it impacting their work and their day in a very positive and seamless way.
I've always been curious about this. What is the biggest disconnect today between what HR, staffing leaders say they want and what they actually adopt?
Well, that's a nuanced question. I think that they are getting better informed on what they want as they're seeing how some of these tools are driving some impacts. But perhaps the biggest disconnects, and there's probably a couple, I would think one, and maybe the largest, is underestimating the people, process, technology interface. And so initially people thought, let's get the tech and we can solve it. But that really underestimates the necessity for the people to be able to embrace it, to use it. And the processes need to flow in a way that technology can fit and enhance those processes. In fact, the processes are probably redesigned to actually take advantage of what the technology can do, as opposed to just mapping old workflows into new technologies. And so I think that underestimation of that level of effort and the organization's readiness for that change are two very, very critical things that have sort of stood in the way of things flowing more smoothly towards adopting innovation. The last one I would suggest, and this shouldn't be a surprise, but it strikingly does catch people by surprise, and that is, all these technology systems rely on the underlying data and data structures. And most organizations today have not been doing the proper hygiene to maintain that data fidelity that these systems require to be effective. And so, it's oftentimes a step back to say, oh my God, how do we organize our data structures well enough to be able to take advantage of these tools? And so that's actually a very strong realization that is putting sort of a task before you can get into actually harvesting any benefits.
That's interesting. Thank you. I think that's helpful. Through your work at TTL, what's a pattern you've learned from watching startups fail that most of the market doesn't see?
Well, that's a very good question. I think one of the things that we always put a premium on is the founder's self-awareness and the founder's ability to take inputs. There's many founders out there that have an idea and they're going to build it come hell or high water, and perhaps not taking into account the way that the client is reacting to it or suggesting it might change or need to be changed in order to make it work. And so founders' inability to sort of be self-aware and take feedback is actually a big detractor from their ability to be successful. We also see these startups all aspiring to go to enterprise. And we used to tell founders, hey, be careful what you ask for, because enterprise clients are very, very demanding. They can hijack your product roadmap. They could make you subservient to building what they need, and then you're not in the market anymore. You're really becoming just a point solution for one particular use case. And so, the ability to discern that and to build to scale at a pace that the company can actually support, I think is critical. And I'd say the last piece that is really another critical success factor is the startup's ability to really stand up an excellent customer service organization or a client success organization. When the SaaS tools came into market, people had the impression that people would just understand them and adopt them. And in fact, that service layer is really a critical piece to being successful. And so founders who have the forethought to invest in customer success early will actually see themselves getting adopted more quickly, being able to take feedback more effectively, and actually having a product that gets into market and shows some real impact.
The big buzzword, AI. How is it quietly changing human hiring decisions? I hear so much stuff, but where you sit, what are you seeing?
Well, first, I wouldn't suggest it's quietly doing anything. I think that it's quite noisily doing things. It's really arriving, and there's a band playing that it's here, and so it's never been quiet. It's always been a headline kind of a thing. And in the early days, it really wasn't even AI. It was really just machine learning and some pretty smart algorithms. And so as that started to come into play and mature, it actually did drive significant impact. And so we see that in the maturation of matching systems. One of the earliest and probably best use cases of algorithms and machine learning was being able to match things together. And so that solved, at the beginning, it solved, how do we source better? How do we identify the good matches? More recently, with the onset of generative AI, I think that the ability to hyper-personalize what you're looking for as a hiring manager, and also for candidates to, more deeply delve into, what is it like at a place to work? What is the experience going to be like? And how does my skills actually stack up against against what the client needs. That version of AI has been making some meaningful impacts lately. And so the personalization has got us over, the massive database. Everyone now has 3 million, 30 million, names, but how do you get to the ones that actually matter for you? And so I think that the generative AI has allowed for that personalization to come through. The most recent foray, though, of course, are the agents. And so when AI is being deployed as agents that are actually able to redo work, I think you're really then starting to see some very, very disruptive potential behaviors happening, and how people react to that, their readiness for it, their ability to, assimilate what that means in their organization are both pretty monumental. And so, today, agents are the buzz, but as a result of that, people are focusing, probably over-indexing on them. But I think there's still significant gains that could be harvested from generative AI that have not yet been fully capitalized on yet.
So is all this innovation AI, is it making the recruiter more transactional, or is it actually moving them forward?
Well, that's again a fairly nuanced question, because I think it's probably yes and yes, but in the case of
Sure.
in the case of will a recruiter or any worker become more efficient, I think the answer to that is yes, if deployed correctly, right? And so if these systems are chosen for a particular use case that can really drive some performance improvement or better outcomes, and sort of standardizing on that and taking the advantage of what that is, and making sure that you wring every drop out of that, then absolutely they will become more efficient, and perhaps that might be determined as more transactional, so they're more transactionally effective. But if that happens, then the opportunity exists for them to become more strategic. And then I would suggest that the AI tools that are in the market today allow for people with the time to actually go in and understand the job requirements more carefully, understand the work culture and the growth trajectory of the company and the roles they're trying to fill in a more holistic way, so that when they do go and pitch a candidate a job, or pitch a candidate to the company for their opening, they're able to talk more succinctly and articulately about how this is a good fit for what they're trying to accomplish. So yes, that makes them more strategic, provided they take advantage of the tools that are available to, use that time wisely.
Okay. I mean, you built a platform, right, that connects startups, enterprises, investors. What's missing in how this ecosystem works today, in your opinion?
Yeah, I don't know that it's missing. We've continued to move the company forward based on how the market is consuming our insights. And so one of the things that we saw, maybe this is 5 or 6 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, clients were getting, asking us to be much, much more prescriptive. In the early days, they would take our guidance, which was largely directional, and pointing them in the right direction for tools that might fit their use cases most appropriately and cost effectively. But as time passed, they were saying, just give me the answer. Tell me, what do I need? I'm a Workday shop, or I've got this ATS, or I've got this CRM. What do I need to apply around it to actually get some success? And so that has driven us to be providing our insights through more consulting engagements. And so that's a very virtuous cycle, because when we're working with clients on their real world challenges and sort of seeing the entire deck that they've got in front of them, we're able to be, we're learning from that. And so we learn tremendous amounts from our client engagements. And then that factors back into the research. And so it's a very virtuous cycle where the research is actually enriched because we are involved with the way we deliver the IP, not just in the form of reports, but now in the form of engagements that help them consume the IP more effectively. Just the last point on that, Talent Tech Labs has evolved, and we do less work with investors now. We no longer are trying to broker that relationship, which we did in our earliest days. Today we're looking at more mature startups, or ones that have the funding and the capacity to support the enterprise clients that we advise. And so, we've narrowed the focus to not be trying to help people raise funding as much as find use cases in industry where their products, will make a difference.
Yeah. Okay. Do you think we live in a world where platforms and not recruiters control hiring outcomes?
I think there might be a tendency to think that we're headed in that direction, and it's quite possible that the technology will be able to accomplish that. But just because it can doesn't necessarily mean that we should. And so right now there's seemingly like a rush to automate. But the cost of that automation is really quite high. And many studies are coming out now supporting the fact that actually the human systems that are in place are actually more cost effective than all the investment going into trying to automate, especially automating from end to end. And so if you try to apply your automation, more judiciously and not assume that you have to, take the entire process and digest it into automation, you're going to have a cheaper build, less expensive build. You're going to have probably a higher chance of being successful because you're building to a narrower outcome. And then you're going to be, more cost effective in allowing people to then be right sized for the roles that are left for them to be working on. So just because the enablement of that technology might allow for full-scale automation, we would suggest that that's probably not the best approach, and people should really think more deliberately about what's the most appropriate use of people, process alterations, and then technology, either to augment or to automate.
So what do you think, and this is because of what you just said, what do you think about this whole thing about, it's all about skills-based hiring now? It's not the resume. And people are saying rubbish. That's not true. I get both. So what are you seeing?
Well, if you peel the onion on skills back to the very, very beginning, it really was just another tag, right? There are hard skills, and then it became soft skills, and then they became these more amorphous skills that are now in this sort of skills first mentality. But, if you can look at it really critically, it's really just another way of understanding the capability or the need. And so it turns out that as skills have played out, they became a very expensive expedition to go on. And right now, people that have early adopters of that are kind of saying, is that all there is? Was the juice worth the squeeze? And so we're even seeing some of the biggest players in that space sort of pivot and no longer be leading with their skills. These internal talent marketplaces, for the most part, are no longer pressing hard on the skills ontology. They're moving more into how you can, create a skills infrastructure, which is, inference and things like this that allow for levels of talent intelligence to be discerned and acted upon. And so, I think skills were probably overhyped at the beginning, and now the realization is they were very expensive to exploit and very hard to do across the enterprise, perhaps in certain little pockets. And that was the more successful use cases where we actually tried to apply skills methodologies to smaller populations, not the entire job catalog, where you had some chances of success. But, I think it's been overhyped, and that ship has sailed. And so I think we're seeing now the next generation of how the remnants of what they learned in that process can be more effectively applied.
What do you see as being overfunded or overbuilt right now?
It's hard to ignore the investment on the infrastructure side. There's just tons of money going into data centers that are going to give the compute power. But what's driving that is actually a lot of the desire to automate without necessarily striking the balance of what should be automated and what shouldn't. So right now there's kind of an arms race going on, trying to build for the eventuality that you will be able to automate everything. And so I think that's going to be probably an overshot.
Future of staffing.
Well, it's interesting because staffing has been very, very durable, as you well know, and many
Yes.
people over the course of time have predicted all the reasons that it would be in demise. And I think that right now, for different reasons, staffing can still be very, very resilient and very powerful. Partially because organizations, their end clients, are finding it very difficult to grapple with all these technologies and trying to drive certain outcomes. And I see staffing being relevant and successful in the future as a wholesale buyer, if you will, of enabling technologies that help the client get what they need at the end of the day without having to fuss about actually owning everything. And we've seen this happen where originally those machine learning platforms that were able to match turned into very, very large candidate databases. And then eventually the way that those candidate databases were being offered up were on a transactional model. So you just pay for success. And so if staffing companies, take advantage of, where they can agentify their workflows successfully and give the client, a higher probability of success more quickly, I think that they'll not only continue to persist, but actually increase their importance to our client's organization.
If you had to take a bet on one shift that hasn't happened yet, at what it means for the future of this industry, what would it be? I mean, you can have at it.
Well, I think that It wasn't obvious. It wasn't obvious when people were trying to create candidate pools that the candidate pool would actually be, the end product. And then after that happened, they realized that wasn't as valuable as they thought. And so, the shift to, a different business model to deliver what that work was able to create in the way of a product for them. I think a shift that could happen is the ability to agentify workflows on the service delivery side, but the next piece of that is actually being able to better understand the makeup of the work so that you can more precisely find either candidates or work quotients that might not be a full person, might be an agent, it might be an outsource, it might be an offshore, it might be a part-time gig, it might be a service that could be, purchased through a temporary labor marketplace. If you're able to more granularly break down the makeup of what that work is and understand the cost differentials of achieving, the outputs from any of the sources that they come from, that's a really masterful shift. And I think it's what we would consider to be sort of agile workforce planning. And that continues to be the holy grail that large organizations are searching for. And so I think that shift, can actually be tackled if you're able to, discern the tea leaves well enough with the way you look at the technology and your flexibility to offer business models that make it compelling.
Yeah. Oh, total talent management has been a buzzword. I don't know for how long, and people you go back, you revisit, you pull it out, put it away. So,
Yeah.
Well, yeah. What are your future plans with TTL? Anything interesting on the horizon?
Thank you for asking. We're launching a new research platform. We're in beta right now. We're in a soft launch and going to a hard launch in early July. And what this will be is a platform that allows clients to have more opportunities to access our IP at price points that are perhaps more compelling because it meets them where they are. In the past, we offered static reports and people would download these and then discern. And now with the platform that we're delivering, they're able to actually get what they need. It's real time. They're able to query, what does this vendor do? It'll be a real-time report as opposed to something that was published 6 months ago. And then they'll be able to look at landscapes of, what the technologies look like when they're stacked together at other companies that you might be in a peer group with or that you compete with. And so the ability to see, what's working for other folks and then, have a layer of collaboration where, the platform will allow for member-to-member collaboration. There'll be a freemium version of this that people can go on and try it and enjoy, the free research. But, at some point, many will go deeper and get the full benefit of Talent Tech Labs, analysis and capabilities and project capabilities that are, driven usually by SOW work on the other side.
So it's a combination of buy as you need it, and maybe that could lead on to more longer, deeper engagements. Did I get that right? Okay.
That's right.
All right. Well, it was a pleasure having you. Thank you very much for your time, Brian. Appreciate it.
Wonderful speaking to you. Thanks for the
you.
opportunity.